July 14th, 1518, Strasbourg, France. A woman named Frau Troffea steps into the street outside her house and starts dancing. There's no music, no celebration, no festival happening. She just starts dancing, and she can't stop. Her husband begs her to come inside. Neighbors try to help, but she keeps dancing for hours, then days. Within a week, 30 more people join her. Within a month, 400 people are dancing in the streets of Strasbourg. Some are collapsing from exhaustion, others are having heart attacks. And according to some accounts, people are literally dancing themselves to death. This actually happened, and historians still can't fully explain why. This is the story of the dancing plague of 1518, one of the strangest events in recorded history. So first, let's set the scene. Strasbourg in 1518 was not having a good time. The city was part of the Holy Roman Empire, sitting right on the edge of what's now France and Germany. And the people living there had been through absolute hell for years. We're talking about crop failures, famines, and diseases like smallpox and syphilis tearing through the population. Just 3 years before the dancing started, there had been severe famines that killed a lot of people from starvation and malnutrition. The survivors were traumatized, malnourished, and living in constant fear that disaster could strike again at any moment. On top of all this physical suffering, there was intense religious anxiety. This was right after Martin Luther challenged the Catholic Church in 1517, so there was massive religious tension everywhere. People believed deeply in divine punishment and the power of saints to curse or bless them. It's into this powder keg of stress, hunger, disease, and religious fear that Frau Troffea started dancing. The historical records are actually pretty detailed about what happened next. We have physician notes, city council records, cathedral sermons, and local chronicles that document this event. So we know this wasn't just a legend or an exaggerated story. It really happened. After Frau Troffea started, more people joined. The dancing wasn't joyful or organized. Witnesses described it as frenzied, compulsive, almost violent movement. People were jerking, spinning, hopping from foot to foot for hours without stopping. Their feet became swollen and bloody. Some broke bones. Many collapsed from sheer exhaustion. But after resting briefly, they'd start dancing again, like they had no control over their bodies. Now here's where it gets really interesting. The city authorities had to respond to this somehow. So they consulted with local physicians who diagnosed the problem as a natural disease caused by hot blood. The recommended treatment? More dancing. I'm not joking. The doctors actually believed that if the dancers kept going, they would eventually sweat out the sickness and it would cure itself. So the Strasbourg City Council took this advice seriously. They cleared public spaces for the dancers, they hired professional musicians to play music day and night, they built wooden stages, they even brought in professional dancers to help keep the afflicted people upright when they started to fall. The logic was basically, if this is a fever that needs to be sweated out, let's give them every opportunity to dance until they're cured. This plan backfired spectacularly. Instead of helping, the music and the stages just made more people join in. Healthy citizens started watching, then participating. The contagion spread. The city council realized they'd made a huge mistake and quickly reversed course. They banned all public dancing and music in the streets, but by then the damage was done. Hundreds of people were caught up in this dancing mania. The chronicles mention that at the peak of the outbreak, somewhere between 50 and 400 people were actively dancing. The numbers vary depending on which source you read, but everyone agrees it was a lot of people all dancing uncontrollably for weeks. The question of deaths is actually controversial. Some sources claim that around 15 people were dying every day at the height of the plague, which would put the total death toll potentially in the hundreds. But here's the thing. The official city records from Strasbourg at the time don't actually mention specific death counts. We have later accounts from historians who wrote about the event decades or centuries afterward, and they mention deaths. But the contemporary documents are weirdly silent on this detail. So we know people were collapsing, getting injured, suffering from exhaustion, heart attacks, and strokes. Did people actually dance until they literally died? Probably some did, but the exact number is unknown and honestly might have been exaggerated in later retellings. What's undeniable is that this was a serious medical crisis that terrified the entire city. So what ended it? The dancing plague finally started to fade in September 1518, about 2 months after it began. The city council, now desperate and out of options, decided to try a different approach. They transported the dancers to a mountaintop shrine dedicated to Saint Vitus. Saint Vitus was a Catholic saint who people believed had the power to both curse people with uncontrollable dancing and to cure them of it. The shrine visit apparently worked, at least symbolically. The dancing stopped. Whether this was because the religious ritual broke the psychological spell or because the outbreak had simply run its natural course, we don't really know. But by the end of September, Strasbourg was back to normal. Well, as normal as a traumatized medieval city could be. Now let's talk about the theories. Because this event has puzzled people for over 500 years, and there's no shortage of explanations. The first major theory is ergot poisoning. Ergot is a toxic fungus that grows on damp rye grain. If you eat bread made from contaminated rye, it can cause something called ergotism, which includes symptoms like convulsions, spasms, hallucinations, and a burning sensation in your limbs. In severe cases, it can even cause gangrene and death. Some researchers in the 20th century suggested that maybe the people of Strasbourg ate contaminated bread and the ergot caused them to dance uncontrollably. The problem with this theory is that ergot poisoning usually causes muscle contractions and convulsions, not rhythmic dancing. And it definitely doesn't explain why the dancing was so coordinated or why it spread to people who probably weren't all eating from the same batch of bread. Plus, ergot poisoning typically comes with other severe symptoms that weren't reported in the Strasbourg case. So while it's a popular theory, most modern historians don't think ergo was the main cause. The second theory involves secret religious cults or heretical sects. Some researchers suggested that maybe the dancers were members of some underground religious group, performing a ritual to seek divine favor or to protest against the Catholic Church. This would explain the organized nature of the dancing and why it persisted for so long. But again, there are problems. The contemporary accounts don't mention anything about religious symbols, chanting, or any indication that this was organized worship. The dancers seemed genuinely distressed and out of control, not like they were participating in a planned ceremony. So this theory also doesn't quite fit the evidence. The third and currently most accepted theory is mass psychogenic illness, also known as mass hysteria. This is a psychological phenomenon where groups of people develop physical symptoms in response to extreme stress, and the symptoms spread through social contagion. The leading expert on this is a medical historian named John Waller, who literally wrote a book called A Time to Dance, A Time to Die about the Strasbourg outbreak. Waller argues that the perfect storm of famine, disease, religious anxiety, and social stress created conditions where a psychogenic illness could take hold. Here's how it would work. The people of Strasbourg were living in constant fear and trauma. They believed deeply in the power of Saint Vitus to curse people with uncontrollable dancing as divine punishment. When Frau Troffea started dancing, possibly due to some personal psychological break, others who were already on edge saw it, and their brains basically said, "This is the curse of Saint Vitus, and it's happening to us too." Their belief in the curse was so strong that it manifested as actual physical symptoms. This isn't as crazy as it sounds. There are well-documented modern cases of mass psychogenic illness. In 1962, there was a laughing epidemic in Tanzania where students couldn't stop laughing for months. In the 1980s, there were cases of fainting epidemics.
In schools, the human mind is incredibly powerful, and when you combine suggestibility, social pressure, and extreme stress, groups of people can develop real physical symptoms with no medical cause. The cultural context matters too. In medieval Strasbourg, dancing mania was something people had heard of before. There had been similar outbreaks in the region in 1374 and at other points in the 14th and 15th centuries, so there was a cultural template for this kind of event. People knew what a dancing
plague looked like, and that knowledge actually made them more susceptible to experiencing it themselves. What makes the Strasbourg case particularly compelling for the mass hysteria theory is the way it spread. It wasn't random. It followed social networks, neighbors watching neighbors, family members joining family members. The progression makes sense as a contagious psychological phenomenon, and the fact that religious intervention at the Saint Vitus shrine seemed to cure people also supports this. If it was a shared psychological state rooted in religious
belief, then a powerful religious ritual could break the spell. The mind that created the symptoms could also turn them off. But here's the really important point. Even if we accept mass hysteria as the explanation, that doesn't make what happened any less real or serious. These people weren't faking. They genuinely couldn't control their bodies. They suffered real injuries, real exhaustion, and possibly real deaths. Psychogenic illness produces actual physical symptoms. The pain is real. The trauma is real. The fact that it
originates in the mind rather than from a virus or toxin doesn't diminish the experience. And that's something we need to understand when we look at historical events like this. The dancing plague of 1518 also tells us something important about how humans respond to collective trauma. When societies face overwhelming stress, poverty, disease, and fear, people can break in ways that seem bizarre to outsiders, but make perfect sense within their cultural context. Today, we might express collective anxiety through different channels.
Social media panics, viral challenges, shared conspiracy theories. The mechanisms are different, but the underlying human psychology is the same. We're social creatures, and our mental states influence each other in ways we don't fully understand. The legacy of the dancing plague extends into popular culture. Artists have been fascinated by it for centuries. In 1592, the painter Peter Bruegel II depicted dancing mania in one of his works. In recent years, musicians like Florence and the Machine wrote a song called Choriomania, inspired by the event. In 2020, filmmaker Jonathan Glazer made a short film about it during the first COVID lockdown, drawing parallels between the isolation and collective trauma of the pandemic and the stress that might have triggered the 1518 outbreak. There's something about this story that resonates across time. Maybe it's the image of people literally unable to stop moving, trapped in their own bodies. Maybe it's the reminder that there are forces, psychological and social, that can overwhelm individual
willpower. Or maybe it's just the sheer strangeness of it, the fact that something so bizarre actually happened and left such detailed records. What can we take away from the dancing plague of 1518? First, that history is weirder than we usually imagine. Second, that the human mind and body are capable of extraordinary things, both amazing and disturbing, especially under extreme stress. Third, that cultural beliefs shape physical reality in ways that are scientifically documented but still kind of mysterious. And fourth,
that when we study strange historical events, we're not just learning about the past, we're learning about ourselves, about how humans work, about the thin line between normal behavior and collective breakdown. The people of Strasbourg in 1518 were just people like us, trying to survive in difficult circumstances. The fact that their suffering manifested as uncontrollable dancing rather than something more familiar to us doesn't make them alien. It makes them human, and that's both the most fascinating and the most unsettling.